Imagine for a second that it's 1914.
Right.
The entire world is just effectively setting itself on fire.
Oh, absolutely.
The Great War, what we obviously now call the First World War, has erupted across Europe. You've got trenches being dug, artillery rolling out, and Britain, the great imperial master, finds itself in a massive bind.
They are completely overstretched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need men, they need money, and they need resources just to feed this massive war machine. And who do they call? They call on India.
And the irony here, I mean, the absolute dramatic irony of this moment is that India actually answers the call.
Yes. And that is the cloud that hangs over this entire period we're getting into today.
Mm.
Because you have Indian nationalists who have spent literally decades arguing that British rule is draining the country dry.
Right, that it's fundamentally exploitative.
Yeah. Yet, when the empire is in peril, India sends troops. India sends money. But here's the big question that really drives us today, and the question every student of history really needs to grapple with.
Why?
Why support the colonizer? Exactly. Why did nationalists support their colonizers? And arguably, more importantly, how did that support curdle so quickly? I mean, how do we go from let's help the empire in 1914 to the Home Rule League movement just 2 years later?
Which was one of the most aggressive political agitations the country had ever seen.
Right.
It's a fascinating pivot. You effectively go from this intense loyalty and a desire to help to a fierce demand for self-government in the span of, what, about 24 months? It's really a masterclass in political disillusionment.
And the awakening of mass politics.
We're definitely.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are conducting a strategic, line-by-line analysis of Spectrum's modern history.
Specifically, Chapter 14.
Right, the First World War and nationalist response. We're zeroing in on pages 311 to 321.
And our mission today is pretty specific. We aren't just here to recite dates for you. We really need to decode how the Home Rule League movement actually paved the way for mass politics in India.
Yeah, the mechanics of it.
The nuts and bolts. And perhaps most importantly, we need to look at the Lucknow Pact of 1916, because that is a moment that fundamentally changed the trajectory of Hindu-Muslim relations.
For better, or, as a lot of historians argue, for worse.
Right.
Now, before we jump into the trenches of 1914, pun very much intended, we have some really important housekeeping. This deep dive is explicitly focused for our UPSC aspirants and is brought to you by the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this to get an edge on your preparation, or, even if you just love history, we humbly ask you to pause right now and subscribe to the channel.
It really helps.
It does. It helps with your retention because you'll get notified of these breakdowns, and it ensures you just don't miss the next chapter.
Absolutely. And look, we know this content takes a lot of research.
Okay.
So if you are capable, and really only if you are capable, please consider supporting us on Patreon.
It's your support that keeps this high-value content flowing.
We have to give a massive, heartfelt shout-out to all our current supporters. You folks literally make this creation possible.
And also, please engage with us. Like the video, leave a comment below. It tells the algorithm to find other learners like you who need this material. Tell us what you think.
And for resources, because obviously we know you need notes to revise, check the public Telegram channel for free notes with practice previous year questions or PYQs.
But if you want the full deep dive experience, the really premium experience, you can join the private Telegram library.
Right, and that includes access to all videos in the series at once, organized premium notes, detailed summaries, extra PYQs, and model mains answers for those tough descriptive questions.
Just DM us on the public channel to join.
Okay, housekeeping done. Let's go back to 1914. Set the scene for us. The war starts. We know the revolutionaries abroad, the Gadrites in San Francisco and elsewhere, they're thinking, great, Britain's distracted, let's try a violent overthrow.
They see an opportunity in Britain's difficulty.
Exactly. But what is happening inside India? What's the mood on the street in Bombay or Calcutta or Madras?
The mood inside India is, well, it's complicated. It's not black and white at all. To understand 1914, you really have to look at the two main camps in the Indian National Congress, the moderates and the extremists.
Right, because the split happened back in Surat in 1907, the famous shoe-throwing session. So they aren't exactly talking to each other at this point.
Correct. The moderates, who effectively control the Congress machinery at this point, people like Gokal and Firoz Shah Mehta, they actually decided to support the empire in the war.
Which seems wild in retrospect.
It does, but their logic was transactional and also somewhat rooted in a sense of duty. They believed that if India proved its loyalty, if it basically bled for the empire, then Britain would be morally bound to reward them with self-government once the dust settled.
So it was a sort of loyalty for royalty kind of deal. We scratch your back, you give us dominion status.
Precisely. They genuinely believed in the British sense of justice. They thought, we are citizens of this empire, we will fight for it, and in return, we will be treated as equals.
And what about the extremists?
Well, the extremists, led by Tilak, they also supported the war effort, though for slightly different reasons. They had this mistaken belief that Britain would be grateful, and they didn't want to be seen as traitors during a huge global crisis.
So everyone is effectively lining up to help. But that's the elite perspective. That's what the lawyers and the intellectuals are thinking in their drawing rooms.
Exactly.
For the common man, the guy farming rice in Bengal or the factory worker in Bombay, the reality of the war wasn't about political bargaining. It was about survival.
This brings us to the key factors leading to the movement, which you'll find outlined on page 312 of your source text. Because you can't have a revolution on a full stomach, usually. The first major factor was just extreme economic distress.
Let's unpack these wartime miseries. Because I think in history we often just say inflation and move on. But what did that actually look like on the ground?
It was brutal. I mean, a war is incredibly expensive. Britain was pouring money into the trenches in France. And who pays for it? The colony. India saw massive high taxation to fund the war effort. But more immediately, the prices of basic commodities just soared.
Right.
We aren't talking about luxury goods here. We're talking about food, cloth, kerosene, salt.
Kerosene and salt, those are absolute essentials. If kerosene prices go up, you are literally sitting in the dark at night. If salt prices go up, your food is tasteless and you can't preserve meat or fish.
Exactly. And remember, India was exporting food grains to feed the British armies. So domestic supply dropped and prices skyrocketed. It became a hunger issue right at the dinner table.
And that creates a very fertile ground for agitation.
You can't mobilize people who are comfortable. You mobilize people who are angry and hungry. The common man realized that while the elite leaders were talking about loyalty and duty, his own children were eating less.
That is such a powerful motivator. But there was also a more, intellectual shift happening too, right? Mm-hmm. Disillusionment. We talked about the moderates hoping for a reward, but by 1914, 1915, that hope was already fading fast.
It was. Think back to the Morley-Minto reforms of 1909. The British had presented them as this great step forward in constitutional reform.
But they were essentially just a showroom dummy. They looked good, but did absolutely nothing.
By 1914, it was clear to everyone they were hollow, the carrot was fake. Indians realized they had no real power in the legislative councils. They could debate, they could ask questions, but the British officials could just shrug and ignore them.
Right.
So you have economic pain combined with the political realization that the British weren't going to just hand over rights out of the goodness of their hearts.
And I imagine the war itself fundamentally changed how Indians saw the British. For a century, the British projected this image of total invincibility, the whole white man's burden thing. They were the civilized masters, always calm and superior.
And that is the third major factor, global exposure. The First World War shattered that myth completely. Indian soldiers were shipped off to fight in Europe, in the Middle East, and Africa, and they saw the British crying in the mud. They saw them panicking. They saw them dying just like anyone else.
It humanized the oppressor in a very dark way.
It did more than humanize them. It demystified them. Soldiers returned home with stories. They effectively said, hey, these guys aren't gods. They're just men, and they can be beaten.
Wow.
You can't rule a people if they stop fearing you, or at least stop believing you're some superior species. That psychological barrier was broken in the trenches of WWI.
So we have a hungry population, a disillusioned political class, and a massive loss of fear regarding the British. That is a powder keg. But a powder keg needs a spark. It needs leadership. And in 1914, a very important figure comes back onto the scene.
Bala Gangadhar Tilak, the Lokmanya, the father of Indian unrest, as the British called him. He was finally released from jail in Mandalay, Burma in June 1914.
He had been gone for 6 years. He was sent away in 1908 after the Swadeshi movement. And 6 years is a lifetime in politics. The world had completely changed.
It had. And honestly, the nationalist movement had largely stalled without him. The Congress had basically become a dull debating society. But when Tilak came back, he had to play a very, very delicate game. He was older, his health wasn't great, and the government was watching him like a hawk.
They were just waiting for an excuse.
They were waiting for him to make one wrong move so they could throw him right back in prison.
So he couldn't just come out swinging.
No. He initially sought to reassure the government. He publicly stated he wasn't looking for a violent overthrow. He framed his demand as a reform of administration, not sedition. He basically said, I am loyal to the crown. I just want the administration to be better. It was a strategic retreat to gain some space to operate.
Clever. He's testing the waters, finding the legal way to agitate.
Right. And while Tilak is recalibrating over in Maharashtra, another figure enters the stage. Someone who brings a completely different energy and a new template for agitation. Annie Besant.
The Irish Theosophist. Now, this is an interesting character because she isn't Indian. She's Irish.
Yes, but she had been in India since 1893. For the first 20 years, she was mostly focused on social and religious reform, education, and running the Theosophical Society. But around 1914, she decided to enlarge her sphere into politics. She looked at the state of India and just said, this needs to change.
And she brought with her a very specific model, didn't she? The Home Rule League.
Correct. This was borrowed directly from the Irish independence movement. Ireland was fighting for home rule within the United Kingdom. Besant argued, why not India? If it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for the Indians.
The term home rule itself is interesting. It sounds much less threatening than independence or Purna Swaraj.
That was exactly the point. It implies self-government within the empire, much like Australia or Canada had at the time. It was essentially a demand for dominion status.
Okay, so this brings us to one of the most confusing points for students and, honestly, for anyone reading this history. We have the Home Rule League movement. But there wasn't just one league, there were two. Tilak had one and Annie Besant had one. Why? Was there a fight? Were they rivals?
It's a great question, and it's a very common stumbling block. The answer is surprisingly pragmatic. There wasn't a fight between Tilak and Besant personally. In fact, they admired each other, they coordinated. But their followers, not so much.
So the fan clubs didn't get along.
Exactly. You really have to understand the demographics here. Tilak's followers were largely conservative, Marathi Brahmins, very rooted in tradition. Besant's followers were more westernized. Many were theosophists. Some were old moderates who just didn't like Tilak's radical past. So to avoid friction, they agreed on a strict division of labor. They carved up the map to avoid stepping on each other's toes.
Let's break down this map, because this is often a specific point in prelims. If you are a UPSC aspirant, listen up right here. Let's look at Tilak's league first.
Tilak set up his Indian Home Rule League first, in April 1916. His headquarters was in Pune. Now look at his territories, very concentrated. He took Maharashtra, Karnataka, the central provinces, and Berar.
But there's a catch with Maharashtra, right?
Yes, crucially, his territory in Maharashtra excluded Bombay City.
Wait, excluding Bombay City, that's the biggest city in the region. It's the economic hub. Why would Tilak just give that up?
It shows the level of cooperation and pragmatism between them. Bombay was a highly cosmopolitan city. It had Parsis, Gujaratis, British, Muslims. Tilak's appeal was very strong in the Marathi Artland, but Besant's broader, more eclectic appeal actually worked much better in a melting pot like Bombay. So he left the capital of his own home province to her.
That is fascinating. It really shows they cared more about the end goal than their own egos.
Indeed. Now, Tilak's league was tight. He only had 6 branches, but they were incredibly active. His demands were the classic trio Swaraja, which is self-rule, linguistic states, meaning reorganizing provinces by language, and vernacular education, so education in the mother tongue.
Okay, so Tilak is holding down the fort in central and western India. What about Annie Besant?
Annie Besant launched her All-India Home Rule League a few months later in September 1916. Her headquarters was in Madras, which is now Chennai, and her territory was, well, everything else.
Everything else.
The rest of India, including Bombay City.
So geographically, she had a much, much larger footprint.
Much larger. Her league was massive in scale. We're talking 200 branches compared to Tilak's 6. But it was looser organizationally. Tilak's was a tight ship. Besant's was a very broad coalition.
Who were her main people? Who was running this massive network for her?
She had some heavy hitters. George Arundale was the organizing secretary. You also had B.P. Wadia and C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer. These names become very important later when the government starts cracking down.
Before we move on to the crackdown, I actually want to flag something specific from the source material. There was a reference to a UPSC prelims question from 2013 regarding Annie Besant. I think this is a perfect time to break that down because it trips people up constantly.
Oh, yes. This is a classic trap question. The question asked candidates to identify which statements were correct about Annie Besant. The options were One, she started the Home Rule movement. Two, she was the founder of the Theosophical Society. And three, she was once the president of the Indian National Congress.
Okay, let's unpack that. Statement 1 started the Home Rule movement. That's true, right? We just discussed it.
Yes, along with Tilak. That's a safe bet. Statement 3, president of the INC. That is also true. She became the first woman president of the Congress in 1917 at the Calcutta session, specifically because of the insane popularity she gained during the Home Rule movement.
So the trap is Statement 2, founder of the Theosophical Society.
Exactly. This is where the detail really matters. Annie Besant was the president of the Theosophical Society in India, and she was its face for many years. She built its massive headquarters in Ahir, Madras, but she did not found it.
Who founded it then?
The actual founders were Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, and they founded it in New York way back in 1875. Besant joined much later, converted to Theosophy, and then moved to India.
That is a crucial nuance. It's the difference between being a CEO and being the founder. Students often conflate the two because she is so utterly synonymous with the society in India.
Precisely. So the correct answer would exclude Statement 2. You always have to watch out for those founder versus president distinctions in history questions.
Good tip. Okay, back to the movement itself. We have these two leagues. They've divided up the map. But what did they actually do? I mean, was it just people standing on soapboxes in the street shouting home rule? How did they actually reach people?
It was much more systematic than that. This period marks the true shift from elite politics, where lawyers meet once a year in December, to pass resolutions in English, to mass politics. They wanted to educate the public. They wanted true political literacy.
So less lobbying the British Parliament, more talking to the Indian farmer.
Yes. They set up libraries and reading rooms all over. They held classes on politics for students. They organized plays and songs. They used newspapers aggressively. Besant had New India and Commonweal. Tilak had his flagship Kesari in Marathi and Maratha in English.
It sounds almost like a university revolution.
In a way, it really was, and it worked. They managed to reach regions that had been totally ignored by the Congress up to that point, places like Gujarat and Sindh. These were considered politically backward regions at the time, but the leagues woke them up. They created a network of communication that just didn't exist before.
Now, the British government isn't blind. They are currently fighting a world war. They see this massive agitation growing. They see common people reading Kesari in the villages. Do they just ignore it?
Not at all. They are terrified. Remember, the Gadrites are actively trying to stir up mutiny in the army at this exact same time. Now, these Home Rule Leaguers are stirring up the civilians. The government goes straight for the stick. Severe repression, especially down in Madras, where Besant was based.
What did they do?
They banned students from attending meetings. They clamped down hard on the press. But the real turning point comes in June 1917. The governor of Madras, Lord Pentland, makes a massive tactical error. He arrests Annie Besant, along with her top lieutenants, B.P. Wadia and George Arundel.
And as we know from basically all of history, arresting a popular leader usually has the exact opposite effect of what you intend. It just creates a martyr.
It backfired spectacularly. Overnight, Besant became a martyr. The entire nation rallied around her. Even the moderates, who were previously very skeptical of her, who thought she was way too aggressive, they had to protest the arrest because it was such a blatant attack on civil liberties.
This is where Sir S. Subramania Iyer comes in, right?
Yes. He was a retired judge of the Madras High Court, a very respected, elite establishment figure. He did something that carried immense symbolic weight in the British system. He renounced his knighthood.
That's a huge deal. That's basically telling the king, I don't want your honor.
He wrote this scathing letter, effectively telling the British, "Your honors mean absolutely nothing to me if you treat us like this. I cannot wear this title while my people are in chains." It was a massive slap in the face to the empire.
And Tilak. How did the Lion of Maharashtra react to Besant's arrest?
Tilak ramped it up. He advocated for passive resistance. He threatened to launch a movement of civil disobedience if she wasn't released immediately. He mobilized the rank and file. The government quickly realized they had created a monster. They couldn't keep her in jail without risking a full-blown revolt during wartime.
So the movement is absolutely peaking in 1917. Besant is a hero. The leagues are growing rapidly. The British are scared. But then it just kind of fizzles out by 1919. It's like a balloon that just suddenly loses air. Why? What happened?
It's a perfect storm of decline. It's never just one thing in history. You can trace it to 5 specific factors. First, the organization was just too loose. You can't sustain long-term pressure without a rigid discipline structure, and they didn't have that yet. It was a movement built on enthusiasm, not discipline.
Right. And then things get ugly on the ground.
Yeah, communal riots. In 1917 and 1918, serious Hindu-Muslim riots broke out in Bihar, UP, and Bengal. Nothing kills a unified nationalist movement faster than internal communal violence. It completely distracted people and broke the unity.
That's tragic. What about the British? Did they change their tactics?
They did. They realized the stick wasn't working, so they switched back to the carrot. In August 1917, Montague, the Secretary of State for India, made a historic declaration promising self-government eventually. This really pacified the moderates. They thought, okay, we won. The British promised us self-rule. Let's stop shouting in the streets and start cooperating again.
And Besant, I mean, she gets released in September 1917. Does she keep fighting?
She is released, but she vacillates. This is really where her leadership faltered. She loses her edge. She isn't sure whether to support the Montague reforms or reject them. She tries to find a middle ground and ends up pleasing no one. When a leader hesitates like that, the followers just drift away.
And Tilak, where is he in 1918 when all this is falling apart?
Tilak leaves the country, which is a fascinating sidebar. He goes to England, and not for politics, but for a lawsuit.
Wait, a lawsuit? In the middle of a national revolution?
Yes. He sued Valentine Chirol, a British journalist. Chirol had written a book called Indian Unrest, in which he called Tilak the father of Indian unrest and linked him directly to terrorist activities. Tilak was furious and sued him for libel.
That seems, I don't know, petty, given the stakes.
It was a huge matter of honor for him, but strategically it was a total disaster. He went to London to fight the case. He lost the case, by the way. But more importantly, the movement lost its general at the most critical moment. While he was arguing in a London courtroom, the movement in India just lost its direction.
So Besant is hesitating. Tilak is in a London courtroom. The moderates are pacified by empty British promises, and riots are breaking out.
And finally, a new star is rising: Gandhi. By 1919, Gandhi's satyagraha methods, Champaran, Kheda, Ahmedabad, they were really catching the public imagination. The home rule style of agitation through education, libraries and speeches, suddenly looked a bit old-fashioned compared to Gandhi's action through suffering and satyagraha. The energy just shifted entirely to the Mahatma.
So looking back at it, was the home rule movement a failure? I mean, it lasted barely 3 years and then faded away.
Absolutely not. You cannot call it a failure. That would be a very superficial reading of history. You have to look at the positive gains.
Go on, what were they?
First, it created an entire generation of ardent nationalists. These were the foot soldiers who would eventually man the trenches for Gandhi's non-cooperation movement a few years later. Gandhi didn't start from scratch. He inherited the massive network that Tilak and Besant built. Second, it bridged the gap between the town and the country. It took politics out of the drawing rooms of Bombay and brought it into the villages.
And diplomatically, did it achieve anything on paper?
Diplomatically, it forced that 1917 Montague Declaration. That was a huge shift in British policy that never would have happened without this pressure. For the first time, Britain admitted their goal was to let India govern itself. That was a huge win.
And it also facilitated the reunion of the Congress, right? The moderates and extremists finally coming back together.
Correct. Which leads us directly to our next major segment, the Lucknow session of 1916. This is the absolute diplomatic high point of the era. If 1917 was the peak of agitation, 1916 was the peak of unity.
Okay, let's go to Lucknow, December 1916. Ambikacharya Majumdar is presiding. The atmosphere there must have been electric. You have the Congress meeting, the Muslim League is meeting. Everyone who is anyone is in town.
It was. You really have two massive things happening simultaneously at this session. First, the readmission of the extremists to the Congress.
The great family reunion.
Yes. Remember, they were violently kicked out in 1907, so why the reunion now?
Well, people die. Right.
Exactly. The old guard of the moderates, Gokhale and Firza Shamitha, both died in 1915. They were the most staunch opponents of Tilak. With them gone, the path was much clearer. The younger moderates were way more open to unity.
And Tilak, as you mentioned earlier, had mellowed, or at least pretended to.
He reassured everyone he wasn't trying to burn the house down anymore. He basically said, look, I am a constitutionalist now. So the Congress becomes whole again. The bitter split of Surat is finally healed. But the second event at Lucknow is arguably even more significant historically, the Lucknow Pact.
This is the formal agreement between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League.
Yes. For the very first time, they stood on a joint platform against the British.
But we have to ask why. Because the Muslim League was founded in 1906, essentially as a loyalist organization to protect Muslim interests specifically against the Hindu majority. Their whole existence was based on loyalty to the British Crown. Why on earth join hands with the Congress now?
Because the world had changed. The Muslims were furious with Britain. This is a great example of geopolitics affecting domestic politics. First, Britain refused to help Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, in the Balkan Wars in 1912 and 13. And then in World War I, Britain actually ends up fighting Turkey.
And the Sultan of Turkey was the Khalifa, right?
Yes, the spiritual leader of the global Islamic world. So Indian Muslims felt their religion was under direct attack by their own colonial masters. They felt the British were trying to destroy the caliphate.
Ah, so this is the precursor to the massive caliphate issue later on.
Exactly. Then you have the annulment of the partition of Bengal in 1911. Remember, the Muslims of East Bengal actually liked the partition. It gave them a Muslim-majority province. When the British suddenly reversed it in 1911, just to please the Hindu nationalists who were protesting, the Muslims felt completely betrayed. They realized the British will drop us the second it's convenient for them.
So it's very much the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If the British are betraying us, let's go talk to the Congress.
Plus, the leadership of the League was changing. The old conservative loyalists of the Aligarh school were being replaced by younger, much bolder leaders, men like Maulana Azad and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And we really have to mention Jinnah here. Yes, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. In 1916, he was a member of both the Congress and the League. He was the primary architect of this unity. Sarojini Naidu famously called him the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity.
It is wild to think of Jinnah as the champion of Hindu-Muslim unity, given where we end up in 1947 with the creation of Pakistan.
History is full of such dramatic turns. In 1916, he was the bridge. So they meet in Lucknow, and they hammer out this Lucknow Pact, but it involved a very controversial trade-off, a massive give and take.
Let's unpack the terms of that pact. What did Congress give up? Because they gave up something huge.
The Congress conceded and officially accepted separate electorates for Muslims.
Whoa. Okay, let's pause there and make sure everyone understands the gravity of this. Separate electorates means that in certain constituencies, only Muslims can vote, and they can only vote for Muslim candidates. It effectively segregates the democracy based on religion.
Correct. And the Congress had opposed this vehemently since it was introduced in 1909. They argued it was anti-national, that it fundamentally divided society. But in 1916, they accepted it.
Why? Why cave on such a fundamental core principle?
They were just desperate for unity. They believed that if they presented a truly united front, Hindus and Muslims standing together, the British would have absolutely no choice but to grant self-government. They thought separate electorates were just a temporary compromise, a small price to pay for freedom. They thought, let's get the British out first, and we can fix the voting system later.
But in hindsight.
In hindsight, historians often call this a massive blunder, a huge strategic error. By accepting separate electorates, the Congress officially recognized the Muslims as a completely separate political entity. They legitimized the logic that would eventually lead to the two-nation theory. They basically accepted the premise that a Hindu cannot represent a Muslim, and vice versa.
That is a very heavy legacy for one agreement. It planted the seed of partition, arguably.
Arguably, yes. It institutionalized communalism in mainstream Indian politics.
So what did the League give in return? What did Congress get for this massive, historic concession?
The League agreed to join the Congress in demanding constitutional reforms. They effectively said, okay, we will stop just asking for protection from the Hindus, and we will join the Hindus in asking for power from the British.
And what were the joint demands they came up with?
They were actually quite bold for the time. They demanded that 50% of the Viceroy's Executive Council should be Indians. That's a huge jump in representation. They wanted expanded legislative assemblies with elected majorities. And a real favorite of the Nationalists, they demanded that the salaries of the Secretary of State should be paid by the British Treasury, not by the Indian taxpayer.
Stop making us pay for the guy who oppresses us. I love that one. It's so petty, but so entirely fair.
Exactly. Why should the starving Indian peasant pay the salary of some wealthy official sitting in an office in London?
So you have the home rule agitation on the streets, and you have the Lucknow Pact unity in the halls of power. The pressure on the British is just immense at this point. It's a complete pincer movement. How do they respond?
They respond with the Montague Statement of August 1917. This is the direct result of all that pressure. Edwin Montague, the Secretary of State, stands up in the House of Commons and makes a historic policy declaration.
What did he promise? And let's look at the language carefully here because we know the British are masters of vague promises.
He promised, and I'll quote this directly, the increasing association of Indians in every branch of administration and the gradual development of self-governing institutions with a view to the progressive realization of responsible government in India as an integral part of the British Empire.
That sounds like an incredible amount of bureaucratic word salad. Gradual development, progressive realization, increasing association.
It is absolute word salad, but it contained one magic phrase: responsible government.
Why is that phrase magic?
Because in the British Constitutional Dictionary, responsible government means a government answerable to the people or their representatives, not just to the king or the governor. It implies real democracy. It implies that the executive can actually be voted out. This was the first time the British government officially acknowledged that the ultimate goal of their rule was to eventually let Indians govern themselves. Before this, they had never admitted that. It meant that demanding Swaraj was no longer an act of sedition. It was just asking for agreed government policy.
Okay, so that's the good news. It shifted the goalposts massively. What was the catch?
The catch was entirely in the fine print. First, gradual. Montague said it would be a gradual development. Gradual could mean 10 years or it could mean 1,000 years. There was no timeline attached.
Right, we'll get there when we get there.
Second, British discretion. Montague made it very clear that the British Parliament, and only the British Parliament, would decide the timing and pace of this advance. They would decide when Indians were ready.
So, we will give you freedom, but only when we decide you are grown up enough to handle it.
Exactly. It was patronizing in the extreme. It treated Indians like children who might get the keys to the car one day if they behave and finish their vegetables.
Naturally, the Indian leaders weren't throwing a party over this.
No, they saw right through it immediately. They objected that there was no time frame. And they deeply resented the idea that the British were the sole judges of India's fitness for democracy. Tilak famously called it unworthy and disappointing. But it was just enough to split the movement. The moderates said, hey, it's a start, let's work with it. The extremists said, it's a sham.
So let's bring this all together. We started in 1914 with a global war and a surprisingly loyalist India. We moved through the Home Rule Leaguers, waking up the masses, Tilak in the west, Besant in the south and north. We saw the high point of unity at Lucknow in 1916, where Congress and League hugged it out but planted the seeds of separate electorates. And we end with the British promising responsible government in 1917, but firmly keeping the keys in their pocket.
And by 1919, the Home Rule movement fades. But, and this is the absolute key takeaway for your mains answers, the stage is set. The Home Rule movement and the Lucknow Pact were the bridge. They connected the dormant elite politics of the early 1900s to the massive explosion of mass politics that Gandhi is about to unleash.
It basically built the army that Gandhi would lead.
Precisely. Without Annie Besant's newspapers, without Tilak's speeches, without the unity forged at Lucknow, the non-cooperation movement of 1920 would not have been possible. You can't have a mass movement without a politically conscious mass. The Home Rule League created that consciousness.
It really highlights how history isn't just about the famous big moments, but about the daily grind in between that makes them possible.
Absolutely.
Before we sign off, here's a provocative thought for you to chew on. We talked about the Lucknow Pact and the blunder of accepting separate electorates. If the Congress had refused that concession in 1916, if they had just said, no, we will only unite on a secular joint electorate basis, would the partition of India in 1947 have been avoidable? Or was the communal divide already too deep to fix by then? Did the price of unity in 1916 actually cost India its unity in 1947?
That is a massive what if. It suggests that by trying to buy peace in the short term, they effectively mortgaged the future of the nation. But then again, without that unity in 1916, maybe the pressure on the British wouldn't have been enough to get any reforms at all.
It's really something to ponder. History is just full of these sliding doors.
Indeed it is.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We really hope you found this strategic analysis of Chapter 14 valuable. We always try to go deep, not just wide.
And if you did find value in this, please do us a quick favor. Subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP on YouTube right now. It really helps us out. And if you are capable, support us on Patreon so we can keep the lights on and the research coming.
Huge shout out again to our supporters. You guys are the best. Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. Tell us what you think about the what if question we just posed. Do you think the Lucknow Pact was a mistake? Let us know.
And remember, check the public telegram for the free notes and PYQ linkages we discussed today.
And for the serious aspirants, the full deep dive experience is waiting for you in the private library. Just DM us on the public Telegram channel to join. You get the premium notes, extra PYQs, and those all-important model mains answers.
See you in the next deep dive.
Keep learning.